So now I want to call in on stage Program Director, Medina Smart City, Al Medina, Al Munawar Development Authority, Engineer Mohammed Al Sharif. Project Director, NXN, Mr. Anwar Kotab. Partner, PwC, Mr. Hazem Galal. Also calling in on stage, Director, ICT Solutions and Design, EITC, Mr. Samir Abdullah. Chief Executive Officer, Toda.Network, Mr. Tofi Saliba. Regional Industry Director, Government, Smart Cities and Public Safety, Microsoft, Mr. Ahmed Farag. And to moderate this panel discussion, please welcome partner NXN, Mr. Hani Obaid. May we call in once again all the panelists to please have a seat on stage. Thank you. Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, let us give it up for your panelists for this session out here. And the topic is going to be the feature of smart cities and district. And now we're going to hand over the stage to our moderator, Mr. Hani Obaid. Once again, ladies and gents, a big hand, please.
Welcome, everybody. So as you've heard, we are the last panel. So we are the last gate for everybody to go home and enjoy the rest of their evening. Let's try to make it a wow session. Try to gather some insights from all of you and some lessons learned. And we're talking about none other than digital transformation of our cities, of our districts, of our nations as a whole. And it's always easy to see how digital transformation or smart transformation has evolved over the years. I remember back in the early 90s when it was electronic data interchange. I used to work in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and it was e-commerce, but within an EDI framework. It's e-procurement, they called it back then. We had big EDI machines the size of 3 meters by 4, and everybody was forced to go down that path and let go of their telex and fax machines that were readily used to communicate their purchasing requirements and acknowledgements. And now, fast forward many years, we're talking about smart cities, digital transformation, we're talking about smart services, we're talking about platforms. And the key issue that comes to me is, how do you define what services a city or district needs? What is the best approach to define such a need? We talked earlier about outcome-based, we talked about certain KPIs, but I'd love to hear from all of you. And why not pick up on the consultant there at the end, Mr. Anwar, who does this for a living. How do you define smart services, Anwar, when you're designing a strategy for a city or a district?
Hi, Hen. It's quite straightforward, actually. You need to relate it back to the strategy of the city. Starting with the strategy of the city overall, where is the city going? What's going to differentiate the city from every other city in the world? Translate that into a digital strategy for the city. Use that to decide where is the city going from a digital perspective. See what are the challenges that will keep the city from getting there, and design the services to deal with those challenges. If that relation is very solid, we start from an articulated strategy for the city and take it through the rounds until we end up with the services. Those services will solve the issues that face the city. In the earlier panel, there was discussion about using the data or the assets of the city to solve real issues of the city. And the best way to do that is to relate it very directly, forward and backwards, from strategy to services.
Okay. So these services then probably in order to be developed further, face challenges. And I'd like to ask the gentleman next to you, what are some of the challenges that you see as we deploy some of these services, and how can we overcome them?
So first of all, thank you for having us. It's great to be here. At Microsoft, we really think a lot around how to enable cities to become smarter. And back to the point of the strategy, we actually think about it from, yes, the strategy, but the outcome on the citizen's life. So we really put the lens on the citizen's life, and we see how we make his life healthier, safer, better educated. And then from that angle, we look at the multiple areas that we want to cover. And that helps us overcome these challenges, because one of the challenges that we see in actually driving that transformation is getting all of the different entities talking to each other, right? They don't talk to each other. If I want to get him to be safer, I need his car to be connected to law enforcement, his house to be connected to CCTV, and this involves multiple angles. So one of the ways we find the challenge of integration across multiple entities, when we put the lens of the outcome, it helps dissolve these barriers because we're taking an outcome or citizen-centric approach. That's how we try to avoid these challenges.
Do you find, just to follow up, do you find the regulations that are there today hindrance to what you want to accomplish, or do they help you? And this is open to all panel members.
Yeah, so it varies from one country to another. We've seen countries across the world where they went very fast because regulations allowed that. We've seen countries or cities where they are still struggling because data privacy issues, data residency issues, data sharing issues are there. But again, the way to overcome these challenges, because if you take any of these challenges on its own, so whether regulatory or whatever, it will be very hard to deal with. But when you take the safety of a citizen as a mandate, all of these barriers will go away immediately, and it will be easier to challenge them. But yeah, big part.
Actually, regulation is one of the main things that the city government brings to the smart city project. It should be the regulator, putting the frameworks, dealing with definitely some of the issues that the gentleman talked about, data privacy, data sovereignty, etc. But at the same time, putting the framework that will allow innovation to happen, that will allow different organizations to share data, to use that data to the betterment of the city. So the regulatory framework is one very big value add that can only come from the city government.
Perfect. So if we look at Hajj wal Umrah as key events that happen every year, we have about 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. We've got 2.5 million visitors for Hajj alone, and probably will increase twofold by 2030. Umrah, we're looking at 19 million visitors, probably going to increase to 30 within the next 10 years. This question's for أخ محمد. الخدمات الذكية اللي أنت بتشوفها تسري من هون لكمان 5 سنين، كيف تختار هالخدمات الذكية وعلى أي قيم و KPIs تختارها وبتأسس نجاحها؟
شكرا لكم للدعوة والحضور. سؤال جيد واشكرك على السؤال هذا. اليوم في
Neither can I. تفضل.
شكرا لسؤالك اخوي هاني. حقيقه تحدي الحج والعمره طبعا هو حدث سنوي، والعدد زي ما ذكرت في ازدياد كبير. اليوم مكه والمدينه تستوعب 11 الى 15 مليون على طول السنه كافري السنوي. العدد ضمن رؤيه 2030 ضمن رؤيه المملكه 2030 راح يزداد الى 30 مليون زائر خلال السنه كامله. فاليوم في تحديات كبيره، وون اوف ذا بيست سوليوشن يعني يكون تحويل اداره المدن من الطريقه التراديشنال الى تو ذا سمارت او ديجيتال ترانسفورميشن في الموضوع هذا، لانه بيقلل عمليه الاوبريشن، بيقلل الهيدك، بيرفع مستوى الخدمه، بيوفر كوست جدا عالي. في دراسه طبعا تحت وحده التحول الرقمي من وزاره الاتصالات وتقنيه المعلومات في السعوديه، ونكسن شاركوا في اعدادها، انه اخذوا سامبلز 5 مدن الرئيسيه اليوم في المدينه، ايش الامباكت على المدن هذه اذا تحولت من طريقه اعتياديه الى طريقه سمارت او ديجيتال. راح يوفروا 11 مليار ريال تقريبا، كرييشن 23,000 وظيفه، وهذا يحل ازمه كبيره اليوم نسبه العطاله ونسبه التوطين في السعوديه تحديدا. ارجع لموضوع الحج والعمره مره اخرى. الحج والعمره اليوم كل المدينة منورة لها احتياج ولها مساكن مختلفة عن مكة. كل نقطة وصول من تحرك الحاج أو الزائر من مكان وصوله إلى أن يوصل إلى أن يرجع ثاني، نفس الجيرني هذه كاملة، كل وحدة لها سبيسيفيك يعني متطلبات معينة في الموضوع هذا. فتحتاج إنه يكون فيها دراسة، تبدأ تعرف إيش الكرنت سيتويشن، وين الجاب أناليسيز عندك اليوم موجودة في الخدمة هذه، وتبدأ إنك تستف عملية إنه كيف تساعد أو ترتقي فيها أو تحسن فيها عن طريق الديجيتال ترانسفورميشن.
ممتاز. هلا انت عندك شو بعض الخدمات الذكيه اللي انت هلا حاططها بالاستراتيجيه عشان تنفذها من خلال 5 سنين؟ ممكن تشاركنا بعض هالخدمات؟
هو الحقيقة التحدي اليوم اللي يواجه الزوار أو الجهات الحكومية المشرفة على قطاع الحج والعمرة اللي هو الكراودنج مانجمنت.
كراود مانجمنت.
إدارة الحشود. إدارة الحشود عندنا تحدي كبير اليوم أن نوجد حل إدارة الحشود ككونسبت مختلف تماما في المدينة مكة عن أي كونسبت أو مدينة أخرى يعني في العالم، حكم العدد وطريقة الشعائر الدينية في نفس الوقت والصلوات وكذا، فيكون فيها تحدي أكبر من أي مدينة أخرى. يعني طريقة الكراود مانجمنت ما هي شبيهة مثلا في أنه في استاد رياضي في استاديوم معين أو في إيفنت في مرحلة معينة، هي مختلفة تماما كليا. فتحتاج يكون عندنا إدارة الحشود بشكل كامل عن طريق أنها سمارت، وكيف تتحكم بالناس هذه وتديرها من خلال الأجهزة اليوم عن طريق الاي او تي وعن طريق الأجهزة التقنية اللي تساعدنا في عملية الارتقاء بالخدمات.
ممتاز. مشكورين. Question to some of the panel members. As we mature from digital to smart, and the previous panels have talked about data becomes an essential element here. Without it, we don't reach the optimal maturity in terms of smartness. But as we all know, and we've all experienced through our endeavors, data is usually dispersed among various entities. What are some of your reflections and experiences around how you overcome this challenge?
Sure. We've been involved with several citywide data exchanges around the world, including DEX, for example, in Singapore. Smart Dubai is creating, in addition to the Pulse platform that it has, it's expanding this to private sector data, and we were right involved with this. So I think what's really important is, as you are bringing all of these data sets together, there are multiple issues that you have to think about. First of all, how does creating a citywide data exchange add value to the contributors to this data-wide exchange as compared to going bilateral between two vendors? But what usually happens is that sometimes the master developer is more interested in the data that is maybe held by the phone operator, whereas the phone operator is not interested in the master developer data. They're more interested in data that is held by the government and so forth. So I think cities, and many have done this around the world, be it Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Singapore, Dubai, and others, are creating these citywide data exchanges to act as this trusted broker. Obviously, with all of this, we have to think about privacy, we have to think about data monetization, and of course, I think I would say the commodity part right now is the technology. All the other things around this are the more complex questions to answer. If we were to create a citywide data exchange in Mecca, for example, where we're currently doing some work, mobility data, and I've seen actually some mobile operators' data provided for roaming that shows you what happens during the days of the Hajj and the heat maps. So it's very contextual, and each city will have to work out what are the data sets that are most important to its own economic, social, and environmental problems, and to prioritize these data sets, and most importantly, create the use cases. I mean, you can talk about it for all you want, but unless you really start creating the use cases and getting those data sets and the stakeholders to collaborate or fight about the monetary value, it is all very theoretical.
Now, for such a thing to happen, you need the platform, and I think a lot of folks either have their own platforms or developing their own or bringing their global platforms to the region. What are some of the key characteristics or motivations for you to bring your platforms to life within the region, and how successful have you been in such an endeavor?
Which one?
Yeah, I'd like to take that question. To be honest, nowadays, I think there's a general realization across most leading cities in the world that the platform is where they need to start right away. That's something it's not a lot of debate now whether you need a platform or not. Probably the form factor is different in different cities, depending on the realities that they're facing. But in Dubai, I'd like to share with you our experience, like about 3 or 4 years ago, when it was still kind of not yet concluded in terms of the arguments back and forth. Dubai took a visionary step and said, no, we're going to go ahead and we're going to establish a platform. We're going to have the Dubai Pulse platform as serving Dubai. And this is something I think from a leadership perspective was very, very visionary back then, okay? And we're seeing the fruits of that today. So if you go to dubaipulse.gov.ae, you'll see about close to 300 data sets from 20 different entities. And one of the key benefits that we've seen is a lot of the entities are now talking to each other, actively discussing on a day-to-day basis breakthrough technologies and how to adopt breakthrough technologies specifically in their services. And to be honest, the whole concept of smart city, one of the biggest beneficiary of the whole smart city concept is events such as Hajj or Umrah. That's exactly the intended purpose, to have the efficient distribution and allocation of resources across a large mass of consumers, and to be able to do that in an efficient manner and establish for yourself the success criteria. So a key success for smart city. So how do you judge yourself if you've succeeded in your smart city program, right? One of the key success criteria would probably revolve around how much of the city data have we used to build and create those use cases, and were able to create a new engagement form, a new method of engagement with the citizens and residents of the city. And I think most of the criteria is going to revolve around that, and that's how probably people are going to judge themselves on kind of how successful they were in their smart city program, and where do they need to focus more of their investment, and where they need to kind of focus more of their development moving forward.
So on that note, and I think it follows the suit, is in terms of how you measure success of a smart city transformation, what are some of the KPIs that you have experienced or you advocate in terms of digital transformation? And what?
No, I want to reflect on what you just said. Actually.
You guys want to hit the data? Okay, then let's go with the data platform. See, it's good. Now they're...
reflect on what you said.
Please go.
One of the key success,
Yes.
one of the key factors of success for smart cities is to drive innovation throughout the city, throughout the community in the city, businesses and individuals. And an engine for that is this platform, to have it concentrating all the data with standard set of APIs, standard set of enablers that will provide safe and secure access and controlled access to this data to all sorts of parties. And that's how we can get the entire community, the entire population of the city, having the potential to innovate, whether businesses, international or local, citizens, residents of the city. And that is a very key success factor for smart cities. We need that platform to drive that innovation.
I want to highlight something, and again, we all agree on the importance of having a platform. I think what we're seeing worldwide is the success of such platform to have all the city in one platform. It's not really there, right? And yes, in principle, I would have one platform. Everything that I do inside the city works on that platform. In reality, it's extremely hard to achieve across all sectors. Because you talk about energy management, for example. Smart energy providers, they have their own platform that they host services for the city, and I charge based on that. Waste management, I have my own platform as a vendor that I offer that service. And when the government comes and say, hey, no, forget all of that, bring your solution to my platform, and then the question becomes, my costing, financing, billing rates, all of that service is an end-to-end service. Why do I need to change that? So I think the discussion in the governments, and that's what we're seeing, yes, I need to have a platform, but that platform is more of a governance platform to control, to manage, to oversee, to have security, and that's where the cloud enables a lot of that. Not just port everything centrally, because it's not a sustainable model. I don't want to disrupt your business. I want it to be more profitable. So it's more of a shared platform for governance and security and advanced analytics, rather than a hosted platform where I need to take everything and rip it off. Right? So that's realistically what we're seeing across the world. And that's where we see as Microsoft that having the right standards, open data, cloud enablement across the board will enable the innovation, will enable the government to deliver these services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with what you've said, and I think I agree that part of the success criteria is kind of to drive that engagement and that adoption and engagement between public and private sectors, and we're trying to do that. We're trying to find models where we can allow the Dubai Pulse platform to be accessible to the private sector and find ways that they feel comfortable to share their data and to be able to engage with the public sector as well. And I think, yeah, this is something that is a key challenge. There are some factors in terms of, you've mentioned in terms of waste management. So waste management is not the same in every city. So in most cities, it's regulated and it's privatized. In some cities, it's a public service, fully owned and operated by the government. So whatever the specific reality of those cities are, will drive some of those engagement models in what they look like as on the ground. However, one of the things that we've seen is having a platform drives that discussion and drives that motivation and helps push that agenda on top of most government discussions and strategy discussions across government entities, and even the private sector is put on notice that, hey, you know, if the government is really doing this and they're really serious about it because they've really gone ahead and established an investment on a platform, that means we also need to really focus on how we are going to move on in the future in adopting these type of new models in our businesses as well.
Good, perfect. So now we've established that, you know, the essence of a platform, whether it's a one-fits-all or various platforms integrated together to meet the common or the ultimate objective. Again, back to my question, how do you measure the success of the digital transformation journey? Whether it be on a national level or even in a community or a district. And I'll have Mr. Tufi here help me with this question in terms of KPIs, objectives, how do we measure success for this digital transformation?
You know, I kind of brag about what I know, but I also humbled to tell you about what I don't know. So frankly, I don't know the answer to that question. Perhaps I'll pass it to someone else. I talk more about, you know, security, resiliency, things like that. But to have KPIs, it's a little bit out of my expertise. So,
We spoke earlier today about some attempts basically through the ISO organization 37120 to create sort of like a universal set of KPIs to measure cities, and then there's a, you know, sort of like a spin-off standard from that for smart city. Now, do I personally believe that you can actually standardize it to such a thorough sort of like comparative standard? I have my doubts, even though, you know, I'm guilty of having been involved in ISO processes in the past. You need to have a yardstick to measure things across the board. But if we all agree on the premise that every city is unique, it has a unique set of challenges, you will not be able to, you know, very accurately standardize the measurement across different cities. You know what good looks like, you know, when you see that the challenges, be it mobility, you know, visitors' journeys in a city like Medina or Mecca are being improved and, you know, enhanced in terms of the customer experience. But actually to be able to come up with an exact set of KPIs, I personally have my doubts.
I mean, from security perspective, the security of the people in smart city, currently not a lot of people asking the right questions about where's this data being processed.
Okay.
And if you were to trace it and see where's this data being processed, is it in New Mexico on some server there? You need to ask what kind of systems, how many hops, who's getting, effectively you need to find out the true cost of running any platform despite what the fees might tell you. Because at the end of the day, if you're able to deploy a solution, let's say from Alipay, and it says 0 fees between one person to another, and that's if it's an electronic money system inside the city, the money moves around many times. In 3 years, over 90% of that money is extracted out of that city. So not a lot of people tell you that. So you need to kind of get to the bottom of it and find am I providing a solution that depends on some other solution? And that goes the same for not only money, for pretty much sovereignty, any kind of data. As it's being exchanged, there's someone getting paid. If that person is getting paid outside of the city, you need to ask the question, why? Can this person be in this city, and can it be self-sustainable? So from that perspective, I think if it's added to the equation of whatever folks do to end up measuring, having a standard around measurement, can be essential to protect the end user and have value that is added to their life.
So if you focus on resiliency and security of cities, and you mentioned a very focal point here in terms of where the servers are for capturing the data, how do you approach resiliency, setting up a resilient city?
So what's happening, and mainly in the telecommunication space, is playing a huge role in it, especially with the advancements of 5G. Most of the protocols that we would be reliant on that's going to secure pretty much everything that we've worked on until that date is going to be dependent on one thing and one thing only. And that thing is a universal constant that cannot be exceeded based on the laws of physics, and it's called the speed of light. The network can get very close to the speed of light. So for example, if somebody is going to take that away from people in the city, and that person is in, let's say, the city is in Shanghai, and that other person is in Japan, the likelihood for that person to win every single time is doing whatever processing that they're running is very, very low. Because the person who's sitting next to you in Shanghai, whatever device that they use, they have a higher chance to achieve governance, help you get to the governance. So that's something that we will be witnessing very soon, and that would likely be very disruptive. And anything that is disruptive and revolutionary, you can't really ask the question, what do the customers want? Because you don't know what they want. Did anybody know what they want before the internet was created? Did anybody suffer and say like, hey, this fax is so terrible. Can you help me build an email? No, email came and said, we've got email. And that's, any revolutionary technology will come and impose itself when people realize what it can do, then they would move towards it. And that's specifically, I'm talking about here, a lot of advancements that are happening in the blockchain. We've been around for 10 years, barely got to penetration 0.2%. Why? Because over 90% of anything that you've heard of about blockchain, perhaps 99% has been either scams or false information. But what's yet to come and will impact each and every one of the gentlemen here and everybody who's providing services to smart cities is true blockchain that can enable smart city to be independent and resilient to attacks from outside, because you've got what it takes to run it. You've got the people, you've got the smartphone, and you've got the network, and that's all you need to run it.
So I'd like to address the question of resilience
Yes.
for a minute, the one that you asked. And to be honest, we are a bit in a different environment in Dubai or in UAE in general. So resilience, for example, in mega cities, if you talk about mega cities like Mumbai or Dhaka, or cities where you have a population of more than 25 million people living in a restricted geographical area, you usually have very common failures in regular services that we take for granted here in Dubai, for example, right? So resilience as a topic probably is much more interesting for them. And smart cities, for example, I don't know if you know, recently in South Africa, in Johannesburg, it was in the news a few months ago, where they had 30 days of water left. So they had only 30 days remaining reserve of water because of 3 years of drought. And the natural reservoirs were not able to be replenished to support the requirements of Johannesburg and at the fast rate that it was growing as a city. So those type of problems, I think smart city gives us the opportunity to really look at these macro issues and come up with some sort of a solution, a practical solution at a mass scale, right? And technologies such as IoT, technologies such as big data, and you know, having a data platform and so on and so forth, what it will do is it will support data-driven decisions. It will support a lot of data-driven decisions for government leaders and city leaders and municipalities and planners, that they can foresee these problems coming in, and then they can try to see if they can create a resilience program for the future to avoid the tragedy in the future. For other cities such as Dubai and UAE, who are much more efficient or don't have such resiliency issues, for them it's more about adopting breakthrough technologies, right? So you have existing services, and how do I adopt these breakthrough technologies and take my experience to the next level, right? So usually, whatever programs you see in the UAE, they're competing to be the top 3 in the world. They want to be either 1, 2, or 3 in the world, right? So it's a different set of problems here in terms of what objective that they're trying to target, right?
I mean, resilience definitely applies across the board. Like you said, it's not just a technology issue, but all the critical systems in the city. We need to make sure that the city continues to function irrespective of failure here or failure there. The digital infrastructure is definitely one of those. And it only takes one good example to highlight the problem. What happened in Gatwick Airport about a month ago, when the digital signage stopped working and people had to resort to wireless. Major disruption to airport operations because of digital signage. So taking resilience into account or into consideration is a very essential piece of designing any smart city effort or infrastructure. It has to be resilient, both at the digital level and as well as at the non-digital levels, like the gentleman said, from all the different critical systems and critical infrastructures that allow the city to function.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's about resiliency by design, right? So from the design, you're designing for resiliency. And technology, if not used in the right way, can be very limiting. So if you decided everything is on-premise infrastructure, then it's very hard to build 3, 4 data centers at the end, right? So I think, and that's where the idea of the cloud, the idea of having on-scale services when you need them, on-demand services. So if I need them, I will get them. If I don't need them, they're there. So I think that design has to be critical. The outcome-based, which every city is different. The challenges are different. And then the other aspect is the security of it, right? And this is the biggest part of focus that we see as Microsoft on the cyber, especially the cybersecurity. I don't know if we'll cover that, but I think it's, if I don't need to prepare for a disaster, I need to prevent it from happening, right? And one of the causes of malfunctions and major disruptions is cybersecurity attacks, especially on IoT. And I think that's the biggest focus of really protecting that environment and making sure that we're ready to respond when failures happen. Yeah. And as a company, we're really thinking twice about this, and we actually launched products and creating products that focus on the security on the edge to avoid any disruption that happens.
So when we talk about smart cities, resilience is usually a key factor of any smart city. Resilience, smart, safe cities, secure cities, sustainable cities. These are all key components of a smart city. And this is for each panel member, and I'll pose the question. We can start from over there. How best to approach the design of a smart city, keeping in mind safe, sustainability, and secure?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. When we were working on our platform, one of the key things that we did was we kept evaluating the threat landscape, right? So what are the vectors that are the key vectors against this threat landscape that we have, whether it's related to the platform, whether it's related to a specific use case, and so on and so forth. To be honest with you, over the last 3.5, 4 years, we've seen a very dynamic threat landscape. It keeps changing. It's not something that you could just set it and forget it. Not at all, not anymore. It has been this way for many years, right? But because of the whole smart city concept brings technology into into traditional city services, the threat landscape kind of exponentially expands and gives a lot of real estate for people who with nefarious intent to kind of create some sort of an event. So we looked at it, and to be honest with you, our opinion is that it has to be a holistic approach. It would absolutely have to be a holistic approach. It's expensive. It's absolutely expensive. It's not a traditional security budget where you just take 10% and you say, you know, whatever project I have, I will allocate 10% for security. I think that's no longer sufficient to have a resilient service anymore. You would have to look at it in a holistic fashion. In some cases, your solution might be traditional security technologies. In other cases, you might need to change the way you have the experience, the user experience. You might have to, you know, canvas a new user experience to avoid most of the new threats that are you know, propping up every day. So this is really something that is a continuous process, something that I think everyone is going to struggle with, obviously. And it would have to be absolutely a holistic approach. It's not only technology, but also business processes, and also the user experiences. You'd have to look at all angles to make sure that you've covered the changing threat landscape.
Anwar, you've designed various cities. You've put in master plans for districts and communities. How do you embed resilience and security within such
It's a very good question. I don't have an answer for that, but what I'd like to tell you is I've been going to many different conferences, and every opportunity I get to talk about smart cities, I do, right? I try to market the concept as much as possible. I've been living it day to day, and my team does as well. I've met a lot of people that have given me a lot of different perspectives. For example, I've met urban planners, and urban planners have a completely different view of the world, as I've discovered, you know, when I've interacted with them in these conferences. And they talk about, you know, creating communities based on urban boundaries and creating urban spaces and so on and so forth. So at the end, it's about getting all of these competencies together, right? So once we get all of these competencies together that are responsible to build the whole city experience, we need to be able to draw from all of them, and really someone has to arbitrate where we really focus our investment. It's a really difficult task, to be honest.
Thank you.
Would it be fair to put on a certain trajectory to see where we're getting at some point? Because I fear from certain notions of smart city that they may not necessarily be smart, but another S city, like stupid cities. And frankly, it's perhaps the actual measurement criteria may need to incorporate what's the increase in GDP per capita that we're doing, what's how the quality of life. Perhaps we measure by the increase of suicide. Is that making it better in the city? Perhaps we measure by increase of homicide and so on and so forth. I'm based in San Francisco, and I can tell you with certainty, you can just take a walk around the street and notice that that is not what you want to build in the future. It's just way too many regulations prohibiting somebody who's done well to help the person who's not doing well. But at the same time, you probably don't want to have cities that they are restricting freedom so much, so then you stop innovation. So whatever measurement criteria folks would get to perhaps would help folks building the resiliency accordingly, because the resiliency is has to have some sort of criteria where we're going.
Yes.
What are we building? Is it for the people at the end of the day, or is it for the notion of let's just have a smart city and forget about the people? And I think we should look after the people first. There's one thing that is common between every single Homo sapien. Each and every one of you can identify to that when you look at your children. Do you want them to be free or not?
Well said. I mean, we all agree the quality of life is a key indicator for a smart city. We've talked about it in the pretty much, I think, all sessions prior to ours. Access, privacy, security. These are all key indicators that are all fit under the various dimensions of what makes up a smart city. A smart city is not primarily a technology-centric entity. ICT enables all the dimensions of a city to make it smarter. Of course, with data being the key pillar. We look at environment, we look at the people, we look at the living conditions, we look at economy, GDP enhancement, entrepreneurship. We look at governance to make sure that we all are working together in cohesiveness and collaboration. All these dimensions make up that smart city, and resilience is a key element of that. Anwar, you had some comments? Mr. Qutb?
No, I want to concur with what Mohammed said, that the... so you were saying about urban designers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has to take multidisciplinary action to build a sustainable city and a diverse city.
Fair enough. Any other comments?
I just
Yes.
want to reiterate the fact that no matter what you do for smart cities, the blood and vessels of that smart city will always be money. And be careful who you give your money to manage by. Ideally, you'd want to have smart cities that they are self-managed when it comes to money, using decentralized governance. You have what it takes to run that today. And you should not accept any notion of somebody's telling you, oh, hey, come to my blockchain, I do mining somewhere else. This is not the right way to do it. Cities, they have what it takes to manage their own money, and that's necessary element to get to the resiliency you're talking about, because otherwise, folks, they're going to come in to attack you, they will come and take your blood away, and you don't want that happening.
Yeah.
Well, on that note of money, and I need to move on to, because we're limited in time, is the different models of operation of a smart city or smart communities. Speaking from experience بالمملكة العربية السعودية, كثير من الاتجاهات is towards PPP. أنت بتصورك أخ محمد بالمدينة صح؟ هل PPP موديل محبوب وكيف ناويين تتعاونوا مع القطاع الخاص بتنفيذ PPP models in smart city innovation؟
أنا بس بعرج على تعليق الأخوان في موضوع الأيربن بلانينج. مهم جدا للمدن على أساس تحدد وين الاحتياج وترسم الخطة. زي ما تفضلت اليوم في مفاهيم كثيرة، السيف سيتي، السمارت سيتي، الاقتصاد الذكي، وين التارجت حق كل مدينة، والبلانينج دوره مهم في الخطوة هذه، يحدد ايش الجولز او التارجت اللي بتوصلوا المدينة تحديدا. إجابة على سؤالك واستفسارك، البي بي بي والبي او تي كونتراكت هي طبعا عقود اليوم او فرص استثمارية جدا كثيرة اليوم موجودة. ما هو كل شيء زي ما تفضل انه نفس الحكومة هي اللي تقوم في تشغيله وادارته، انت لازم يكون في اوت سورس، والاوت سورس هذا يكون كواليفايد لعملية الخدمة على اساس اللايف اوف كواليتي للناس، والاكسبيرينس حقت الحاج او المعتمر او الزائر تكون جدا يعني متميزة، لانه الهيدك بيكون اعلى واللود بيكون اعلى على الجهات الحكومية في عملية التشغيل والصيانة والمتابعة. فموضوع البي بي بي يعني صار اليوم في مشروعين ضخمة في السعودية. مشروع قطار الحرمين اللي هو بين مكة والمدينة، هذا بي 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 كونتراكت، وواحدة كتجربة من التجارب في مع جاكا هيئة الطيران المدني في مطار المدينة المنورة على نفس الطريقة. فكانت التجربة جدا ناجحة. الدولة وضعت الرولز ووضعت التشريعات والجهات الحكومية، وأعطت للمشغل المتمرس أو الجيد أو اللي له هيستوري قوي في الموضوع عملية الإدارة والجودة، وكانت تجربة جدا جميلة.
From the other panelists, how do you see PPP unfold here in our region?
I typically refer to PPPs as properly planned projects, right, rather than public-private partnership. And
can we trademark that? Because I like that.
Yeah. And then some people will add a fourth P for the people, yeah.
We don't want the fourth P.
You don't want the people?
I don't want to know what the fourth P is.
Yeah, okay.
So, that's the next question.
I think a big mistake, especially in Saudi, that I've seen in the past was to think that everything and each asset type lends itself to PPPs, which is, you know, I mean, yes, you can have a PPP around smart parking, smart metering, the business case is there, and it's proven. But you cannot have a PPP for some of the common infrastructure like a command and control center. These are the type of investments that the government would need to undertake. So that's the first point. It's, King Abdullah Economic City, the assumption was the whole thing was going to be built by the private sector, and that turned out to be a flawed assumption, as we all know. Second point, when you're thinking about, again, going back to the properly planned projects, the whole sort of like procurement cycles, and we did actually a piece of work with the World Economic Forum about this in terms of how to involve the private sector early enough during the planning, the designing process for the project. It's not like you're going to bring them, towards the end of the cycle and expect that you've already designed the perfect PPP. So how to bring in the private sector with the public sector early enough in the process to co-design almost the project, keeping, of course, in mind, all the fairness, transparency about procurement and public. Third point is around PPPs, that both sides have to look at this more from a strategic partnership point of view. In many parts of the world, we have the symptom of not in my term of office, another acronym, NIMTO, which means that if I'm a government official or a mayor, and by definition some of these projects would require 10, 15 years of return, it is not in my best interest as a politician to make that decision now. So how do we guarantee that stability for the private sector by having consistency in those cities where leadership can change every 4 or 5 years? So these are just some thoughts on PPPs, because yes, they work and they work wonderfully, but we need to be also very cognizant of some of the limitations and the timing.
So the traditional PPP model may not be the ideal model for us moving forward,
Yeah.
such that the private sector forks out the bill for the CapEx, and then we negotiate
It's not going to
the
be
OpEx.
for all asset types. Selectively, yes, and the case is there. And we need to think about maybe new business models to make them work for some other types of assets.
Yeah, and I would like to add to this as well as a private sector, as a corporates, we've actually reshaped how we offer our services, and we're moving away from having CapEx to more of OpEx and subscription-based services, right? Because you cannot expect a PPP model where you're asking a customer to make an upfront commitment, right? So we're even seeing that transition in how we offer our services to be subscription-based and on-demand based. So because again, most of these contracts, they vary based on maybe high season when something goes up, you need a big infrastructure, and then things go down. So we're really shifting everything that we do as a company to offer that flexibility to the PPP provider and eventually to the end customer. But I agree with the point that it's not the magic bullet for everything. There are certain limitations, but we are changing our model to accommodate all of that.
Okay. Now, on your last point, I know we're out of time, but it's okay. They merged 2 sessions into one, so I get a couple more minutes as a bonus here. You said don't involve people in properly planned projects, being the fourth P being people. What are your insights? I'm very curious to see, are they a hindrance or could they be a motivating factor to
What do you mean, don't involve people?
when you said the fourth P being people?
Okay, no. I refer to the fourth P is, when you run quickly to the restroom. So in that, we don't want that in a piece. No, people is definitely, I would put it number one all the time.
Okay.
If we're not doing things for people, I think we should just stop where we are. Everything that we're working on, and I believe everyone from the panelists would agree with me, you work towards the people first, but sometimes you're in a certain position that you know certain things about the future, you become extremely passionate about delivering the message to the people early on to get them to react to something. For example, if you're on the beach and you know there's a wave coming, great, you might call your friends and hit the wave, whether you're surfing or whatnot. But if there's a tsunami coming, you may want to either run or go from behind and help shape that tsunami. And currently, what I try to tell folks, there is a tsunami coming. wake up. If you're asleep, don't resist it, please. It is coming, and what's coming, what I refer to as a tsunami, what's referred to by many other people as blockchain, but the current blockchain is not what that tsunami is. The real tsunami is when each and every individual that you know, and including yourself, will be able to have full control of their assets without having to depend on anyone in the middle, not government, not banks, no one in the middle. And that is going to introduce phenomenal opportunities for a lot of you and smart cities to provide the new services and new business, knowing that people are back to where they used to before the current moment where electronic money system is used as a method of control, any ledger system, whether it is your registry for car or land or whatnot, they're used as a method of control. Remember, 50 years ago when those were presented, they were not presented as methods of control. They were presented as services to the people. And they need to get back to the people. And if we don't do that, then what we end up building for the future is even worse things when it comes to the power of, for example, AI. Imagine you let your children play in the playground, and AI is supposed to be watching them so they don't get hurt, but then through that centralized governance, end up using certain elements because somebody doesn't like your children, end up punishing them or whatnot. Would you want that to happen? And chances are you're going to say no, and I'm hoping you'd say no. And I'm hoping we start building decentralized governance early on and start watching and building that tsunami together for better future of next generations.
Beautiful. Any other final thoughts from the panel before we conclude? You said enough? No.
They all agree with me.
They all agree, that's great. Thank you, no questions. You can leave.
I think there's a question
there's
there.
more questions, okay.
There's some questions?
Sir.
Question.
He gets an energy award for Mike.
Salibas have lots of questions.
No, it's not a question for my brother. I come from a commercial real estate background, and it's great to see here a representative of master planning of a city, because that obviously involves a lot of the real estate. But a question for you and for the rest of the operators, I'm really curious to know if you believe a smart city initiative can be successful without integrating real estate developers and investors and requiring their involvement. And if the answer is no, then we need them. Is it going to be enforced, do you think, by regulation, or are they going to be incentivized to become part of the smart city? And if they are incentivized, on whose expense? And then where does the line stop? When I enter my building, is that going to continue all the way to my house? And how's that beneficial to a smart city? So I guess the first question is, are you seeing a lot of involvement from real estate developers who are inclined to participate and help building a smarter city? And then are they incentivized to do it or not?
Yeah, so I'd like to give a response to this. So from the operator perspective, we ourselves and also at the Salat, we're having actually quite strategic discussions with real estate, and especially it's acutely a reality in UAE because of the types of real estate projects that happen here at a mass scale. So we are having discussions with them from smart buildings to smart districts to smart streets versus smart entire communities, entire development communities. So we're having actually quite active discussions with them. And there's a lot of discussions in terms of what are the use cases that constitute a smart district, so that qualify a district to be called a smart district. What are the use cases that when you put them all together constitute a smart city or a smart neighborhood, for example. So a lot of these discussions are actively happening with a lot of the real estate developers. With regards to the regulation, so a lot of the regulation is quite critical because there are so many stakeholders that need to align to have a successful outcome. Without regulation, the differences in risk appetite between the stakeholders, it prevents any sort of outcome to be manifest, right? So regulation really helps in those kind of scenarios where it creates a kind of a common risk profile for most
So
of the stakeholders that they're comfortable to engage.
So in this instance, in your experience, who's putting the regulations? Is it coming from the telcos or coming from the real estate agency? And is it being enforced on real estate developers, or are they incentivized in a different format? I don't know if you have the answer.
There's no enforcement right now. There's a lot of incentivizing, there's a lot of guidelines on how best to develop your districts or communities to be smart. We are seeing a lot in the region. A lot of communities are moving forward and putting the ideal infrastructure, ideal services that are aligned to either the vision of the city, the vision and strategy of the nation, to meet the end results of its people. So there's a lot of alignment that happens when you develop these services, or smart services you may call them, but the government is there to assist you because they've been there and done it, as you say, in developing roadmaps and master plans. So, and I've seen a lot of our consultants here in the region work with a lot of developers to say there are guidelines that you need to keep in mind. There are some incentives provided specifically in Dubai by Smart Dubai office, who have guidelines already published, and it's open data that you can take it and you can figure out what makes your districts smart. And if you don't know how to get them, we can help you, guide you towards that path. But districts outside of Dubai that we've worked with, whether they be in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, whether they be in the state of Qatar, whether they be in Bahrain or Oman, etc., all these developers are saying, we want to provide more for our citizens, we want to provide more for our residents, we want to enhance their experience while living in our communities, we want to enhance their quality of life, providing seamless services with the least red tape. And if we do that, more will come, and in turn the government and the regulatory bodies will assist us to make that happen. So it's not a, Uncle Sam forcing you to change your urban plans according to a certain parameter, but there's a lot of incentives, and at the end of the day you're winning because you're developing the services that are required to attract people to your communities. Sorry guys, I had to say something. You can't be all
You did great.
Yeah, I mean, just, and I'm conscious of time, outside of the region, I'll give you 4 examples where we've worked with master developers to add to their value proposition through this. One of them was in Australia. When we were also working on the smart city roadmap for Hong Kong, there was a lot of input from the master developers. In Rio de Janeiro, in the regeneration of Porto Maravilha, the master developer was really keen on creating the connectivity and offering differentiated services. And the last one was actually in Kazakhstan as well, in Astana, where we worked very closely with a lot of the master developers to create the Smart Cities Roadmap. So it's happening. They went from the awareness stage in terms of what do I do about this to consciously having their own smart city strategy and unique value proposition to differentiate themselves.
Thank you. Any other questions? Going once? Twice? Thank you.